All right, here we are back with another recap of the Civil War. This week we're moving on into the early part of 1862, where we've got several things going on. Admiral David Farragut will capture the important port of New Orleans for the Union, and Ulysses Grant and his good buddy William Sherman are going to head into the dreadful Battle of Shiloh. Shiloh is the first real big confrontation between Union and Confederate forces out in Shiloh, Tennessee. Later on, generals will say that both sides had completely green, raw soldiers. Not even at Bull Run, where there are two more pathetically trained armies, the ones who fought for 2 days at Shiloh. It was a bloody, nightmarish mess. And in the beginning, for the Union, we have Ulysses Grant, who is given the task of taking out the city of Corinth. And they are going to knock that out. It was a way for the Confederates to get supplies from the Mississippi to the Tennessee River and all the way up to Virginia. A couple of guys he's going to have with him is his trusted compatriot, William Sherman, and an Illinois politician named Ben Prentice. And as Grant and his men get off the boats, they come upon a little United Methodist church in Tennessee called Shiloh Church. And there's soft green grass and rolling hills. Peach blossoms are budding. It is a picturesque scene of beauty. And so his men make a classic mistake. They don't dig in. They don't prepare defenses. Grant is waiting for Don Carlos Buell to bring 50,000 soldiers down the Ohio River to link up with him. And combined, Grant and Buell will have 100,000 soldiers that will steamroll their way down to New Orleans. However, as the battle begins, things quickly go awry. Grant doesn't have his men dig in. And opposing Grant is Albert Sidney Johnston and P.G.T. Beauregard. Their idea is to smite Grant before he can link up with Buell, drive half of the army down the hill by the church that they are in, down into the Tennessee River. So on the morning of April 6th, about 5:30 in the morning, the battle begins. And there was dead quiet, and all of a sudden, screaming, shouting, and explosions ring the air as it went from dead quiet to a fierce battle. Grant was having breakfast on the other side of the Tennessee River, and he heard the sound of guns. He gets on his horse and rides over. Many of his aides said, "Don't worry, it's just the guys clearing the gunpowder out of their guns. It's an affair of the pickets." And Grant says, "Then why hasn't the fighting stopped?" And all along the front, chaos is ensuing. Everybody is being driven backwards towards the river. William Sherman tells one guy, colonel from the 53rd Ohio, "You stand right here, I'll get you reinforcements." And as soon as Sherman leaves, the colonel says, "Every man for himself," and he takes off running. Well, the Confederate punch hits very, very hard, and it drives the Union soldiers back, but mistakes are made when Confederates find breakfast and cook wagons and souvenirs in the Union soldiers' tents, so they begin to slow down. Grant is able to ride back and forth and stabilize the situation. No more was this stability brought about than down here in this sunken road, right over in here, led by Illinois politician Ben Prentice. It was called the Hornet's Nest. Assault after assault after assault are made on the Hornet's Nest, and time after time after time, the assaults are repulsed. Albert Sidney Johnston takes one charge in, and as he gets going, Ben Prentice had his men down in the sunken road firing in an arc all around him. So any Confederate soldier that came near, the target picture they had to hit was very small. And his men shoot out walls of lead, destroying the Confederate infantry. Well, Albert Sidney Johnston charges across the field with his men, and he sees them get blown back, and he orders a retreat. He's just about off the field when a bullet rings out. He doesn't apparently think anything of it, and he rides away and says, we're going to find another way to tackle the Hornet's nest. Sidney Johnston has his surgeon take care of a captured Union colonel. He rides a few feet away and falls off his horse stone cold dead. His aides examine his body, and they look around and they can't find anything until they saw blood leaking out of his boot. The bullet had gone over the boot, hit his femoral artery, and he bled to death in 2 minutes. The men don't want the rest of the army to know that Albert Sidney Johnston is dead, so they keep fighting. Throughout the day, the fighting goes on. Grant, running around, is looking to stabilize the situation. He sends for Lew Wallace, and part of his army is fighting. Part of his army is killed or wounded, and part of his army was screaming or crying down by the Tennessee River, saying it's Bull Run, the Confederates are right behind us. And what was apparent at Shiloh is that green raw soldiers are going to do one of two things. They're either going to run away at the first sound of fighting, or they're not going to run away at all. The deadliest fighting in U.S. history was taking place when the lead elements of Don Carlos Buell's army show up. And as they do, they're cocky. They're looking at soldiers cowering by the riverbank. Well, the real soldiers are here now. Let us show you how to do it. And then they walk up the hill from the Tennessee River, and they see the carnage and destruction around them, and all of a sudden they get quiet. Ben Prentice and his men fought all day. When they were out of ammunition, he surrendered. He and 2,000 of his men were captured, but so many Confederates went to look at them, he saves the Union Army by the Confederates taking a few minutes to come and talk with him. So, night falls. Grant has his gunboats, the Tyler and the Lexington, fire through Confederate lines all night. He doesn't want to give them a chance to sleep. Earlier that day, he had written to his wife about midnight that morning. He goes, "It is my hope that the war will soon be over. It appears the other side lacks the will to fight." He goes, that battle, that thought changed during the battle. A thought crystallized in his mind where he tells Sherman, they're probably going to fire me for this. But this army, these opponents won't quit until they are beaten and can take no more. The next day, him and Don Carlos Buell lead a counterattack. The ground is fought over as fiercely as it was the day before, but by early afternoon, the Confederates retreat back to Corinth. The army was fought out. Grant and his army have won. The casualty counts put his losses near 30%, 20,000 men. When the reports were published back in the East Coast, people were screaming for Grant's head. His losses equaled those of Napoleon at Waterloo. And the important thing about Shiloh is it wakes the American public up to what war is really going to be like. There will be 20 more Waterloos to come. But this was the very first big battle. But Grant has won. Elsewhere in 1862, replacing Irvin McDowell is the very vain, brilliant, and egotistical George McClellan, who will be brought in to head the Union Army. He will spend months on the Washington Mall organizing the men, building them into a real army. Throughout this time, he will politic with senators and representatives, having champagne and oysters and clam bakes near the Potomac River, showing everyone how good he was. And he constantly disagreed with President Lincoln on tactics. McClellan couldn't stand Lincoln. They knew each other from their days working for the railroad in Chicago. And George McClellan is going to always claim that his opponents had more men than he did. He's going to take on Joe Johnston. Joe Johnston was thought to have 200,000 men in the town of Manassas. So George McClellan will take his army out down the Potomac River through Chesapeake Bay, land at Fort Monroe, and march 60 miles up the York-James River Peninsula and capture the city of Richmond. He claimed he would be there in 3 days. Well, he lands on April the 4th, and he begins to panic. He tells his soldiers not to race right for Richmond, but he wants all 175,000 to be with him as he slowly works his way through April and May, all the way down the peninsula. By May 31st, he is 6 miles from Richmond. Joe Johnston has been, pretty much broken. The battle is about, the war is about to be over. When Joe Johnston is wounded, and he is replaced with Robert E. Lee. Jefferson Davis says, "Lee, I need you to perform a miracle and drive McClellan down the peninsula." Lee will use Thomas Jackson, A.P. Hill, and John Bell Hood. And they will fight what is known as the 7 Days Campaign. 6 battles will be fought in 7 days. Union General John Porter will lead things off in Mechanicsville, in a fort that he had built that blows A.P. Hill's men to smithereens. The door to Richmond was open, but McClellan ordered them not only to not attack, but to move their defenses over the Chickahominy River and set up a defensive perimeter while everyone else escaped. June 26, the Battle of Gaines' Mill happens, where Porter and his men work through the night, they build defenses, and they fight all day, dissolving entire waves of Confederate men. By 7:30 that night, John Bell Hood's forces come hurling out of the night, and they break through Porter's defenses, forcing him to retreat along the James River. At this point, it's an every man for himself retreat. There's another battle at Savage Station, another battle at Glendale and White Oak Swamp. Finally, on July 1st, Lee was frustrated. He was trying to capture and pin McClellan's big army in the swamps. McClellan's men get to Harrison's Landing in Malvern Hill, a deep water port where the Navy was waiting to pick them up. Lee tries a fantastic charge to capture them. Porter and his men were told you're going to be our rear guard. Keep them from capturing our soldiers getting on the boats. Porter and his men saw this as personal pride. The rest of the army had done nothing. They had been fighting all week, and they built a tremendously powerful defensive line that blows apart the attacking Confederates. Daniel Harvey Hill, Thomas Jackson's brother-in-law, will state later on that it wasn't war, it was just plain murder. And that with Confederate infantry and Union artillery, he could whip all armies of the earth at the same time. Lee was devastated. The big point is that both Robert E. Lee and George McClellan acted like it was a Confederate victory. Lee's army was broken. A quick charge by McClellan down the peninsula ends the war. McClellan had every advantage, but he could not follow through. Where Robert E. Lee, a man who will take long chances, risking his country's freedom, will perform that miracle. And as McClellan sails back up towards Washington, President Lincoln has no choice but to fire him, and Robert E. Lee will reorganize the Confederate Army and is about to be unleashed on the new Union General, John Pope. That's it for this week. Check us out next week as we talk about Second Bull Run and Antietam.